Thanks very much for joining us for this edition of the Intermodal Logistics Podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, joined by my co-host for this edition, Intech Logistics CEO Rick Legore. Hey, Rick.
Hey there. Morning.
And today we are going to be talking about a vital piece of the freight puzzle. And it happens no matter what you move, how you move it, where it travels, it's something you need. It's insurance. And to give us a comprehensive overview, we welcome a guest quite familiar with all things transportation and insurance, and both of them together, Mark Vickers, the Executive Vice President and Head of International Logistics with Reliance Partners. Mark, thanks very much for joining us today.
Yeah, excited to be on the podcast. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Rick. Morning.
Morning.
Appreciate it. So you have a background kind of on both sides of the equation here, as I sort of hinted at there. So tell us a little bit about your background, what got you into logistics, and what got you into insurance.
Sure. So I kind of do a high-level overview. But when people ask me what I do, like on the street, I still basically tell them I'm a logistics guy. And I refer to myself as a logistics person. I spent about almost 8 years at Total Quality Logistics, kind of got my MBA in logistics there, and kind of cut my teeth in everything from a freight brokerage standpoint. And while I was there, a lot of my clients who were heavy in the automotive space, electronic space, aerospace, little food and beverage, they were moving a lot of cross-border freight. They were moving a lot of high-value freight. And at the time, TQL didn't have a huge appetite for moving a lot of that high-value stuff, and they definitely didn't have an appetite for cross-border because some of the differences in insurance standards in Mexico and risk management in Mexico. So those two things bothered me because I recognized the opportunity to provide better customer service in the high-value space and better customer service on the cross-border space. And I also wanted to figure out a way to provide real-time visibility on those shipments and provide the proper level of insurance. And those same clients, those shippers, they were asking me for an all-risk cargo insurance solution, stateside as well into Mexico, and then it became an international product as well. And, I didn't really have an answer for it. I went to our chief risk officer at the time and our legal team, and they suggested, hey, make them sign this waiver of liability. And sure, that protected us as a freight broker, but I really felt that was some of the worst customer service on the planet. I'm like, sure, I'll move your $2 million shipments and I'll make a boatload from it, but I'm not responsible for it at all. And that ate at me for a couple of years. And the other thing is the visibility part. We were a freight broker. We didn't own the trucks. How were we supposed to have real-time visibility? All I was doing was talking to truck drivers all day long and asking where they were, and they didn't answer their phones half the time. So what we started to use, and I'm dating myself a little bit because this is 8-10 years ago, but I started to use MacroPoint for a real-time shipment tracking partner. And I started to use it so much that I ended up joining their leadership team and found a way to also use MacroPoint for cross-border. What MacroPoint is, it's an aggregator of different shipment tracking solutions. So what I mean by that is there's different ways to track shipments. Sometimes it could be an ELD inside the cab of a dry van. It could be a GPS unit on an intermodal container. It could be a variety of things. It could be a driver's cell phone. Heck, it could be a driver's flip phone because not everybody has an iPhone, believe it or not. And that's even more so in Mexico. A lot of the drivers didn't have ELD devices. A lot of them, because that's been mandated in the United States, has not been mandated in Mexico. So we've got different ways to track them. We can also track their TMS. So I was using that a lot. I ended up joining the MacroPoint team. That was an awesome thing to be a part of. Sold MacroPoint to Descartes, and that was also an interesting thing to watch and be a part of. But on top of that, it was still eating me inside that I couldn't provide an all-risk cargo insurance solution in Mexico and also handle a lot of those high value domestic shipments or high value shipments going from Chicago to, say, British Columbia. I wanted to be able to address those, and I was turning those opportunities down, and I couldn't stand it. So I ended up starting a company around it, and I am now an insurance guy. I guess it was my 4-year anniversary at Reliance Partners yesterday. Some people told me on LinkedIn. Thanks. But I still don't think of myself as an insurance person. I just created a borderless coverage product to address a need that I had as a logistician. And I needed that product. So before I really spent a lot of time on it, I was interviewing large motor carriers in Laredo, Texas, northern Mexico, and a lot of the freight brokers, customs brokers, and asset-based motor carriers stateside that were handling high value shipments. And I'm like, is this something you can use? Or how are you addressing this through your annual policy? And they're like, we're not really where we are. Or they're just buying kind of riders that were an excess, and that's how a lot of companies handle it. So I ended up putting together this borderless coverage product that became a company that specifically addressed shipper-specific high value and cross-border needs. So you can grab the cargo insurance on one-off shipments, but most of our clients are more strategically using it for contract business. And that's especially true in cross-border. In cross-border, you're going to handle a lot more contract business than just one-off business. Same in the intermodal industry. You're going to handle a lot more contract than one-offs. And that's who our client base is, are groups that have some high-value contracts, like those, say, Tesla batteries, Samsung, Dell computers, servers, high-value electronics and automotive parts are huge for cross-border. So freight brokers and asset-based motor carriers that are servicing those large contracts, they've always made those shippers sign those waiver of liabilities. And now just 5-6 years ago, has that changed? And nearshoring's a big reason for that. But a lot of these shippers are requesting it. And then on the flip side, a lot of motor carriers and brokers are proactively offering an all-risk solution for high value and cross-border. And we can see it. We see who wins the contracts, because multiple parties will send me the same contract. And the groups that win it end up providing, really the automotive industry specifically, a cargo insurance solution. And the reason they're winning it is because the automotive industry is tired of self-insuring. Right. They're tired of eating a $500,000 loss when their reinsurance has a $100,000 deductible. Or say they're moving freight across the border and each shipment's valued at $130,000 and they've got a $100,000 deductible. It doesn't make sense for them to have insurance in the first place. They're paying, they don't have insurance. So what we found is the main use case is freight valued between really 80 and 500,000 for cross-border. And then the U.S. side, freight valued between 250,000 and really up to 3 million per load. The shippers are really not wanting to self-insure that. The freight brokers and the motor carriers, the multi-mode companies, they're not wanting to self-insure it either. So, and they also don't want, if there is a loss, they don't want that to hit their contingent cargo policy, or they don't want that to hit their primary motor truck cargo policy, because if you have a huge loss, then their insurance premiums for the year are going to skyrocket. So a very interesting way for companies to kind of get those losses and those high risk things off their books is through a shipper's interest product. And that's what Borderless Coverage addressed. And about 4 years ago, got a call from Reliance Partners, and I got a call from a guy named Tom Albrecht. Tom's a great guy, He was at Celadon for quite a while. He's on Wall Street before that. Really respected him. I cold called him a long time ago and asked him to be my client. And during that call, we realized that Celadon's Mexican entity called Jaguar was actually already using my product. So Tom ended up closing the doors at Celadon, and he came on board at Reliance and joined them on their leadership team. And I met the leaders over at Reliance Partners and found that they actually had very similar backgrounds to myself. They're all logistics guys that found holes in insurance products. It was frustrating the heck out of them. They formed a company around that. And I'm like, man, I'm not ready to sell or anything, but we made it work. And boy, it's been a good home for me, my product, and it's been great for the logistics industry as a whole. So high level overview, but there you go.
So we talked about the borderless coverage a bit. So what else does Reliance offer in terms of the freight logistics insurance space?
Sure. So Reliance Partners itself is the largest privately held transportation logistics specific insurance agency in the entire United States now. So really, our core competency in the past and continues to be offering full, all-encompassing trucking insurance programs. So every line of coverage for a trucking company that has under 20 trucks. So that's been our core book of business. That's what we specialize in. We write more of that business than anyone else in the country. And we built a massive team around it based out of Chattanooga, and we've spread out all over the place. So we've also gone way past that over the past 5 or 6 years, and we're offering captive programs for the mega fleets. We offer hybrid programs for captives as well. And then with our leadership team being former logistics people, like for example, Ronald Ramsey and Chad Eichelberger are on our leadership team, and they were owners at Access America, which sold to Coyote, and Coyote sold to UPS. They were all part of that, so they speak my language too. So we found all different kinds of what we've really done is the freight brokerage space for an insurance is still new. The insurance space was written for trucking companies. Freight brokers developed because shippers wanted to access more trucking companies. They wanted more capacity. They also wanted multi-mode solutions, which you can get at Intech. And that's why freight brokers exist. And the insurance space was not created to address that originally. So it's really been up to Reliance Partners and groups like Reliance Partners to punch this insurance industry in the face and make products that are specifically geared to groups that offer asset-based trucking, asset-based rail, air, sea, and freight brokers and customs brokers, and really tailoring products specific to client needs. So when you're talking about a freight broker, you're usually going to have your standards. You're going to have freight broker auto liability, which same thing as third-party liability, and that protects the freight broker in the case of one of those catastrophic losses. And what I mean by that is you've seen some massive court orders against large freight brokers. So, for example, if there's a truck driver driving and they kill someone, that families and the lawyers are going to go after that motor carrier, but then they're going to find that freight brokerage also has quite a bit of resources, and that family takes it another step and goes after the freight broker. And the contingent cargo insurance it's only going to cover cargo in the case that the underlying carrier's motor truck cargo does not respond. the freight broker third-party auto liability, that's going to address issues when there's catastrophic events occur, when a family or any liability case is suing the freight broker. That's going to protect the freight broker. There's a lot of freight brokers that don't have third-party liability, and I call them insane. The second line that's you've got to address in the freight brokerage space is cargo. There's multiple forms of cargo. I think Intex has got a great program where you folks are at right now. And there's always been a contingent cargo form was created several years ago. And now freight brokers are like, this is still terrible customer service, where if there's a cargo claim, your shipper is going to call you as the freight broker, and then you've got to file a claim against the motor truck cargo policy, and then hopefully that responds, and if it doesn't, your contingent cargo form is going to kick in. It's a pretty ugly claims process. So we can now offer primary cargo insurance to freight brokers, and that's fairly new as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you're going through all of this, because here on the insurance stuff, thanks again, first off, for joining us. But and I can go all over the map on this, because, insurance is usually the last thing someone really talks about, because, RFP comes in or a spot quote comes in, and it's always, what's your rate? What's your rate? What's your rate? And you really don't ever get to insurance unless a claim comes. And then the claim comes, and then they go ahead and say, "Oh, well, you're not really covered on this. You're covered this way and covered this way." And in some cases, some of the brokers, they don't even know what they have and how to go about the process, because again, they don't really think about it until they actually have it. Unfortunately, the past few years, really since the pandemic, insurance has been getting hammered. Well, I should say that the cargo claims, theft and fraud has just gone through the roof. I'd like to try to talk a little bit about that today. I could be all over the map. This could go for like a couple, 3 hours, but I know we're gonna keep it about 40 to 45 minutes like we normally do. You got inflation, so the price of the product in the cargo vans, in the trailers, in the intermodal containers, they're going up at the same time that claims are going up, I don't know, what is it, 650% over what it was last year, and it was a similar number to the prior year. So there's all kinds of things. So I really appreciate you going down line by line, but and now I'm starting to get off topic here, because where's the question in this? Where's the question in all this? The question is
the inflation one.
Well, let's hit the inflation one then. Let's go with that one. How is that being addressed and being viewed by brokers and shippers and the insurance community?
Sure. Maybe I should say I don't like the inflation.
Okay.
But everyone knows about it.
The consumer the hardest. Yeah. But that's a big pain point right now, especially for cross-border, and especially with tariff threats. Like, price of an avocado, if you go to the store, costs 50 cents to 100% more already with just the threat there. So, say, for example, a truckload of avocados, well, it used to be $100,000. Now it's $150,000 or $200,000. Is anyone addressing that change in value? No one's thinking about it at all.
Right.
And the amount we make is not different yet. It's just pure inflation. So companies have got to get smart about this. Freight brokers and motor carriers aren't thinking about it at all. The shippers themselves are just starting to really look at it. So historically, every single motor carrier and every single freight broker has got $100,000 in cargo insurance. In Canada, it's very similar. Every single carrier, every single freight broker has got about $2 per pound. In Mexico, call it the wild south. Nobody's got jack. And there's no Mexican carriers have any coverage at all unless they're going through a program, and they don't have, none of them have an annual policy. They only have what's required by law, which is an odd equation that ends up equating to about $2,000 in cargo insurance, regardless of the value of that shipment. Shipment could be worth 100,000, it could be worth $2 million. Carrier's only on the hook for $2,000. So whether it's in the United States, Canada, or Mexico, inflation's hitting everyone. And that the value of the cargo that's historically been valued at $100,000 is much higher now. So a lot of shippers are starting to look at that, and we are definitely seeing mandates or requirements change in new RFPs, specifically for kind of the automotive RFP kind of phase is already passed. It's still going on, but we're seeing in those written agreements that carriers furnish $150,000 instead of $100,000 for the first time. And for a carrier to try to address that is like, are you kidding me? Are we going to have to increase our motor truck cargo policy across the board by over 50%? This is going to cost a fortune for our company. And our advice, I mean, what I should say is, yes, you should increase it across the board, because that's how much the cargo value really is. But honestly, nobody's going to do that. So what we're able to do is address it on a contract basis or on a shipper specific basis, and either increase your limits specific to that client, or use a shipper's interest product where you can get rates outside of your motor truck cargo or your contingent cargo or your primary cargo policy, and you can go outside of that and get rates just for that client. And what some really smart freight brokers are doing are saying, hey, the value of your product's going up. You want the coverage on it? Here's the increased cost. And they're passing this cost on to their client and winning the contracts. So you've got to have a couple arrows in your quiver that can address value changes for specific clients, and everybody's got to start getting used to it, because you never really see the cost of goods go down. Right. Just like real estate, it's just prices keep going up and up. So it's the same thing with our commodities that we're moving every day across all different kinds of modes. So you got to be prepared to address inflation. My advice is to address it on a customer specific basis, and then over time you're going to end up having to get a higher cargo insurance limit.
So are you seeing with Rick mentioned the fraud and theft kind of growing and growing over the last couple of years? Are you seeing then, you just mentioned that shippers are okay still passing along or dealing with the higher insurance costs because that's obviously a concern for them. Is that an attitude that's shifted over the last few years, just knowing how much there is out there, the risk is feeling like it's gone up?
I don't think any shipper's ever okay with the price increase, ever, no matter what the reason is. But fraud and theft, two different topics, but it's been rampant. It's been really, really bad, and it's been worse in some areas than others. Dallas is, I believe, the worst amount of increasing theft right now. But there are some things that transportation service providers can do to mitigate risk before even insurance comes. So there's some really good tools out there that are vetting your carrier base. So the double broker scenario. So there's co-brokering and there's double brokering. Co-brokering is when you are broker load, send it to another broker that you trust. You'd have an agreement with them. That's very common. Double brokering, total opposite. Double brokering is when you take a load and that shipment is then tendered to a fraudulent carrier, someone that you don't know, someone that's imposing to be an approved carrier that you trust, but they've stolen their MC number, they've stolen their identity, and are imposing them, and they steal that freight, or they steal that business. And that is something that is very difficult to prevent. But some of the preventative tools out there are really almost a requirement now for freight brokers to be in business. If you're a shipper, I wouldn't give any broker any business ever unless they're using a highway or a trucker tools or something like that to double vet your carriers. So every single freight broker hopefully has a standard vetting procedure when they're putting a carrier on a load. You need to take it a step further. The bad guys are getting smarter, and you need to have it vetted by a third party that specializes in vetting fraudulent carriers. So that the double brokering scenario is some of the worst theft that we've seen since the start of freight brokerage, and it's more rampant than it's ever been. So from an insurance standpoint, when we see that you're using a highway or trucker tools or something like that, that's a good thing. And we leverage that to try to negotiate your rates lower. And it's better for the insurance industry if you've got that in place. It's better for the shippers if you've got that in place. You want to leverage those carrier vetting tools that you have when you're competing for bids and in RFPs. You want to leverage all your security protocols that you have right now. So there's whatever chunk of change that you've got to pay for those that carrier vetting is worth it, because you're going to get better insurance rates, and then you're going to look like a more trustworthy broker to your shipper partners. Fraud on the other side, if there's internal fraud, there's not a whole lot of coverage that you can get. We've got errors in emissions insurance. We've got some employee dishonesty. But if one of your employees is knowingly tendering freight to a fraudulent carrier, very hard to get that coverage. You definitely want to fire that person.
Oh, absolutely.
So then moving over to the theft side, where people are still dealing with some issues as well. I'm certainly, reputationally, at least, that's a major issue in Mexico. How do you...
Real quick on that topic?
Yeah.
So what we now see from a lot of insurance underwriters is historically they've had a certain deductible in your cargo insurance. Say your deductible's $2,500, and then they've got a higher limit for theft. Say that's $10,000. What we're seeing now is those sublimits being raised for theft. A lot of the times, most of the time, we're now seeing that theft limit at $100,000. The underwriters are tired of it. So the way to get that down is by leveraging your relationships with carrier vetting tools. And if you do move forward with a program that's got a high theft limit, you can still go outside of that contingent or primary cargo insurance and access a shipper's interest product that still maintains a low theft requirement. Because a lot of those shippers are now looking to see, okay, you got insurance, but what's your insurance say about theft? So there's different ways to handle that. Sorry.
No worries. So before we get to the theft, you talked about some methods to sort of protect yourself against fraud before it actually hits you. So what do you share with folks to what they can do to keep a little more secure in terms of their cargo and maybe take away as many risks as they can?
Sure. Well, I think the carrier vetting tool is great. A lot of it's out of your control. But I mean, it's a law now to have an ELD inside the cab. Other than that, I mean, for us to provide cargo insurance on the high value loads, we're oftentimes just going to require you to have escorts, Tive tracking devices or something like Tive in a pallet, trailer tracking, and in-cab tracking. And that's kind of the trinity of tracking is in cab, in trailer, and in pallet, and that can really help against a lot of theft. And in Mexico, we know this for certain. There's A lot of food and beverage companies get significant thefts in between Veracruz and Laredo, Texas. So we will require all three of those to provide an all-risk solution to Mexico, but we can do it. And why that matters is a lot of the bad guys will just take the trailer, maybe leave the cab. If they take the trailer, then they're selling the product. If you got the tracking device on the product, you got a better chance of recovering it. However, it's tough when the government of Mexico is actually tied into the theft. When that happens, well, it's going to be tough to get that one back. But it does happen, and it's important to have insurance on top of your carrier vetting plus tracking solutions.
So you've covered a couple things, and you covered it in a couple different areas. So I kind of want to try to bring it all together. So insurance is great, but okay, let's figure out how we can protect our product, protect our shippers. And so we talked about software helps in terms of trying to vet to make sure that you're not going to get yourself a claim. Talked about different types of tracking to once again try to protect yourself so you never get to a claim. Is there any other things that you're working with brokers or shippers and saying, hey, you should be putting this into place if you've got this kind of product?
I like that. Software, the trinity of tracking plus insurance. If you've got that, I don't know what else you can. There's not too much else you can do. You do want to, of course, have those, whatever the tracking devices are, you want to have it monitored in real time, and then tracking alerts set up. So if they go outside of a certain geofence or anything like that, you get an automated alert. And then when you come in the morning, you want to be able to see, all right, here's all my green loads where, hey, they're safe. Here's my, okay, these ones could be late. Maybe we should address those. And then your red flagged ones where, oh, shoot, this thing is in Antarctica and it should be in Houston. So I think if you're doing all of those, you're doing about as good as you can do, and you're going to want a lot of contracts with it.
Right.
So tying back to, the amount of coverage and then inflation, all that, are you seeing, you mentioned avocados, for instance, but I've heard that, certain products that have all of a sudden become more expensive are now being targeted more than maybe they were a couple of years ago. Are you seeing that happen as well?
Yep. Bad guys are smart. They know it's easy to sell, and they know it's of the highest value. So they know exactly what they're targeting and why. It's not random. They're not just randomly grabbing loads from a distribution center. It's very targeted for specific commodities. For example, Nestle is the client making a lot of baby formula. Very simple to sell baby formula and baby food in that area. So it's very, very heavily targeted. There's specific shippers, there's specific lanes, there's specific trucks that are being targeted. And if you're moving freight in a cross border, you don't necessarily want to pick up with a long haul truck. What I mean by that is there's some very recognizable logos and truck colors that pick up from certain locations. And if the bad guys see those trucks, they know that they're going to be going across the border and being remanufactured or finished goods for a certain reason. So they know what's inside of it. If you're picking up with a local truck from the same facility as with a long haul one, they might not touch it because it's a local truck. So one of the strategies that we've seen is to pick up with a local truck, take it 100 miles, and then transload the product onto a long haul truck or move an intermodal across the border.
So intermodal, you mentioned as like a security measure. So there's a sort of constant move then to find the more secure methods. How is intermodal more secure that you're seeing in terms of getting it across the border?
Yeah, so we are seeing a lot of thefts, but only at the ramps. So when you're picking up the load and you're taking it to a ramp, we're seeing some pilferage and some theft during that process. But once it's on the intermodal vehicle, we're not seeing it too many thefts. So I tell every shipper it's good to have a multi-mode approach, and you should have rail for everything that doesn't require expediting. But I mean, you've seen how the rails are more connected than they used to be, and you can move a shipment from really Mexico all the way up to Chicago and then up to Canada in like a little bit slower than a truck, but pretty similar timing. So there's some security factors there, some certain cost savings there too.
Yeah, and the intermodal stuff that people don't fully realize that the containers themselves, we can identify, not only where the container is, but if the door is open. So if it's outside of an area that it's not supposed to be with the door opening, that brings red flags up for us saying, hey, that something needs to happen here. The other thing is that also in the intermodal wise, some ramps may have more issues than others, and you can go ahead and move. You can go ahead and say, okay, well, we don't want that product or that shipment going through those directions. We'll go ahead and change the routing to go ahead and move around some areas that may have some issues with some particular products. So there's a whole bunch of little tactics, not little, but there's a whole bunch of tactics that you can do with intermodal to help protect yourself as well. So,
sure.
So,
inflation obviously affects costs. Another issue that's been out there, and I know you've written a little bit and talked a little bit about this, is the tariff threat, whatever will end up happening. But obviously, you've mentioned Canada and Mexico. Obviously, those are the two big targets of the current administration in terms of potential tariffs. We're in a freeze period right now. That's only a few more days left before we'll find out what the next step is. But you've said you think it's more of a threat than sort of permanent kind of situation. So how do you suggest shippers, brokers, carriers, everybody who's dealing with cross-border in the tariff space approach it?
Yeah, I've said and written that it's a threat, but it also might not be. I mean, we saw it 25% across the board for steel. So the tariff did go in place for a day. It was live, but honestly, it worked. Mexico deployed, I believe, 10,000 soldiers to the border, and I don't know if that's going to work or not, but Trump's absolutely leveraging potential tariffs to get fentanyl out of the United States and to take back criminals. So it's a tactic that might work, could work, but we know he'll do it. So if you're a shipper, you better have some contingency plans in place. And if you're in the steel industry and you're manufacturing in Mexico and you're going to face a Mexico tariff and a steel tariff, I mean, it might probably hurt my business a little bit, as I really love the Mexican cargo insurance space, but you're going to heavily consider manufacturing in the U.S. as opposed to manufacturing in Mexico. One of the things that is happening though is people are moving, or manufacturers are moving away from China. That's for certain. Even if there is a tax on Mexico, maybe it's not 25%, maybe it's 5%, maybe it is the 25%. Mexico's still going to look like a better manufacturing partner than China. So this nearshoring wave has really sparked concerns on insurance in Mexico, and that's one of the reasons why we created the Borderless Coverage program to address there's no cargo insurance in Mexico. You can now get that. The other big piece that I recently wrote about in the San Diego Trib was China, they leverage their low cost labor. South Korea and Japan, they're leveraging their partnerships with Cambodia and Vietnam. Germany, huge car manufacturer, they're leveraging manufacturing in Hungary and some lower cost countries. That's what the United States has done in Mexico. That's why the whole Maquiladora and MX program exists, is the United States can be manufacturing with lower cost solutions in Mexico and in short driving distance from the United States. Even if there's a tariff, that's not going to end because the labor is so much cheaper. The Mexican government is also still offering incentives for remanufacturing in Mexico and exports from Mexico. So GM and Ford, they're the largest vehicle manufacturers in Mexico. So GM and Ford, they're manufacturing in Mexico and then exporting. The cars aren't sold in Mexico. They're sold elsewhere. That's good for the U.S. economy. So I think Trump recognizes that. He doesn't want to be enemies with the big three. And I'm sure that everything will come to terms. If not, our vehicles will go up by $6,000, $7,000 each. And I don't know if that's best for everybody, but that's my thought on tariffs.
So you talked about with the inflation making the value of loads higher. More of a case by case basis for insurance is a good approach. So how about for a broker or a carrier that maybe doesn't do the high value stuff? Just already it's a high value item. They don't do it on a regular basis, but they've got an opportunity. What do you tell them when that comes to them and how to handle that insurance wise?
Yeah, we can endorse shipper specific terms to their master policy that you'll see kind of wild requests from the automotive industry and electronics industry to have very high levels of auto liability or third party liability and very wildly high levels. First step is you want to try to go back to them and negotiate those terms lower. And then you beat that as hard as you can. And then when that doesn't work, then you come back to us and then we can either provide you an endorsement for that shipper's specific opportunity, or we can write a shipper's interest policy for that specific body of work that's requiring those higher levels on the cargo side. On the auto liability side, there's not really a kind of a bolt-on product that's offered right now. Probably something we'll end up having, but an endorsement to your current third-party liability or auto liability policy for the specific shipper terms is the way to go right now.
So kind of the overall takeaway is it's good to have, you obviously have to have sort of a base and then agility seems to be, on a case by case basis, just see what it is and be able to respond to each individual situation.
Yeah, I think you just created a term. How's your transportation insurance agility going?
There you go.
Well, we talked about we could probably bounce off a gazillion other topics, but want to be respectful of time. So maybe we'll have another time later on. But for now, to wrap this conversation up, tell folks where they can learn more about you and Reliance.
Sure. So if really just go onto the Reliance Partners website, it's a great tool you can have just to learn about what products are out there. There's a lot of ancillary products outside of a master policy where you can partner with Reliance where, hey, maybe stay with where you're at. Maybe you've got a good program and just work with us because we're logistics specialists on very specific needs. For example, like we've got a non-owned trailer liability product. So brokers can now lease trailers for the first time. Very profitable business, and you can be insured for that. So if you go to our website, you can learn a whole lot about it. There's also a Borderless Coverage tab on our site that will show you all of the different offerings we have in Mexico. And myself or one of our logistics team members or one of our asset-based team members, we can help just about any outfit of any size. And it's great to have Intech as a partner.
We appreciate it.
Yep. And I know people can find you on LinkedIn as well. And as you mentioned, the San Diego Union Tribune was a piece that you just wrote. And you're out there too. So I think a quick Google search is a good way to find you as well.
Sure. And we also are having on June 17th, our 8th annual modernization of cross-border trade event with the Laredo Motor Carrier Association in Laredo, Texas. It's an event that started with 20 people at a Mexican restaurant. It's now the largest cross-border logistics event in the United States. So Reliance Partners hosts that. I'm excited for it this year.
Going to need a bigger restaurant for that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll still have tequila, though.
That's an incentive. So, Mark, thanks very much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
For sure. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Well, we could have kept going and going and going. I mean, we're just literally, not literally because I didn't scratch anything, but scratching the surface on the insurance topic, on transportation insurance, on cross-border. Inflation obviously was kind of a big topic here, but you mentioned this is not something that is maybe the thing that everyone likes to talk about, but it's also very important.
Insurance typically doesn't come up unless there's a claim. And then that's when all of a sudden people are running around trying to figure out what's going on, how to handle it. And I like what Mark said. You really have to think about on the front end. Because a rate could be cheap, but if you're not covering your product out there, particularly with the fraud and the theft rising to the levels they are, you're really putting your company at risk. And without being able to put the policy in there that transfers risk from your company to the insurance policy or the insurance companies, that's just crazy. That's why I'm glad that we were able to get him on today. And as you said, we can get him on a couple more times because I take a look at this paper, a couple of papers, and we had all kinds of questions we were going to ask, and we just touched on the surface. And there's just so many more places to go with this. And Reliance Partners, they do a great job out there in terms of supporting the logistics industry and their bolt-on products, which not a lot of people don't know about because they just know the policy that they have and they don't understand the bolt-on policies that they could go ahead and attach to their current baseline policy to give them agility in the marketplace to meet their shipper needs and to protect their company and protect their shippers that they're working with.
Yeah. So again, thank you to Mark for taking the time to speak with us, and thank you for watching or listening, or both. If you're watching, you're probably listening. You can find us on YouTube, on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. We certainly do encourage you to subscribe or follow us however you do get the podcast. Please do comment, rate, and review. And you can also send us a comment via email if you don't want to put it out there on the actual service. If you have a longer question, comment, concern, whatever, you can email us at podcast@intechlogistics.com. And we'd be happy to follow up. You can also visit our website, www.intechlogistics.com, for more about what it is we do. For Rick, I'm Kevin. Thank you very much again, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you much.